Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the last day afternoon session of the HPC Applications track. We've got two speakers in this session. It's my pleasure to introduce to you initially Dr. Jennifer Veitch. She's with the South African Environmental Observation Network. She's an oceanographer who uses numerical models as a tool to better understand ocean processes that are difficult to observe in a cohesive way. Her area of expertise is the Benguela system, from the Angola-Benguela frontal zone at its northern boundary to the Good Hope Jet at its southern. The topic of her presentation this morning is regional and coastal ocean modeling toward an operational system for well-informed decision-making. Before we start, just one thing, questions. If you've got questions during the talk, please use the question mark at the bottom of the screen to post those questions. Those will be passed on to me, and I will be able to moderate the questions on your behalf. Jennifer?
Thanks, Charles. Let me share my screen. Okay, I presume everything's in order. So thank you. Yes, like Charles said, I'm Jennifer Veitch, and I'm the PI of SAN's Coastal and Regional Ocean Modeling Program at the CHPC. So I'm going to share a little bit about the work we do on ocean modeling, with a particular focus on some of our operational initiatives that are intended to support various stakeholders, from search and rescue to the general good governance of our oceans. So I'm guessing a lot of people listening now aren't actually oceanographers, so I thought it important to give an overview of what's happening in South Africa's waters and why we should care about them. So the colors in this bright marble represent sea surface temperatures. Reds are warmest, blues coldest. On land, shades of brown and green distinguish lush from drier regions. So from the perspective of global oceans, South Africa sits in a very unique place. It is the only place in the world where an eastern boundary current system is adjacent to and interacts directly with the western boundary current system. Western boundary current systems lie on the western edge of ocean basins. They're characterized by warm and fast currents that transport heat poleward. So we're looking at the Kuroshio, the famous Gulf Stream, the West Australian current, and ours, the Agulhas, of course. Eastern boundary systems, on the other hand, lie on the eastern boundaries of ocean basins and are associated with cold and nutrient-rich waters that are upwell due to the predominant southeasterly winds. So in this figure, we can clearly see both the Iberian and North African upwelling system, but also our Benguela system. So here is a plot of chlorophyll, the high values in red, and this really underscores the extreme productivity of our West Coast that not only makes an important contribution to our GDP via the lucrative fishing industries, but also supports artisanal fishers and the fishing communities there. Note the green and lush area along shore alongside the warmer Agulhas current and the much drier conditions associated with the cold waters of the Benguela. And this really highlights the importance of the ocean on our local weather patterns. So globally, why are our oceans important? Well, as the Agulhas reaches the end of the African continent, it retroflects. So essentially doing a U-turn, and it heads back off into the Indian Ocean. However, in this process, occasionally an eddy with a diameter of like about 200 kilometers, known as an Agulhas ring, sheds and makes its way far into the Atlantic Ocean. And along with it, it transports heat and salt, which is an important part of the global overturning circulation and is therefore an integral role of global climate. Okay, so now if we zoom into our shelf region and our exclusive economic zone, which is really just that area of coastal water about 200 nautical miles from the coast, it's the area to which we claim rights for exploitation. It could be fishing, drilling, or whatever. It's our part of the ocean, if you like. The white lines here represent the contours of our seabed. So what is actually going on within our EEZ? Well, there are several fairly recently gazetted marine protected areas, or MPAs, not just at the coast, but also in sensitive regions on the shelf and the shelf edge. We have extreme oceanographic conditions. You know, we've got a cold, nutrient-rich west coast and a warmer, west coast and a warmer east coast, and a lot of turbulence in between them. The red ribbon here represents high current speeds of the Agulhas current, with weaker but much more variable currents on the Agulhas bank and off Cape Point. So we also have a lot of globally relevant science going on here. There are also a number of deep sea prospecting areas around our coastline. And about 3 years ago, a major oil discovery with significant economic potential was made at the Brillpudder oil well. So this is in a water depth of about 3,600 meters and is at the edge of our continental shelf and in extremely close proximity to the highly dynamic Agulhas current. This makes operations extremely difficult and potentially dangerous. And let us not forget, of course, Deepwater Horizon in 2010, the huge oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico, in which 4.9 billion barrels of oil leaked and contaminated a vast area of their coastline. Contamination persists to this day, particularly in the deep water ecosystems. Their cleanup efforts relied heavily on the availability of operational forecast models. So more potentially dirty offshore industry on our coast includes oil bunkering or ship-to-ship refueling that happens in Algoa Bay. It happens there because it offers a degree of shelter from the shipping highway that is the Agulhas. The problem is, or part of this problem, is the fact that it lies directly next to one of our largest marine protected areas, as well as a couple of really important bird colonies. And there's much more. We've got aquaculture industries on our south coast that are extremely vulnerable to harmful algal blooms. We have rogue waves that within the Agulhas current that have the potential to take out, chunks of big container ships. There are a number of ideas about offshore renewable energy and so on. So while this booming offshore industry contributes to operations per kisa and its goal to utilize the ocean's economy to boost our GDP, as custodians of the environment, or the marine environment in particular, we are obliged to ensure that this is all done in a sustainable way, and that we can produce appropriate ocean information to feed into management and mitigation decisions, and good marine governance in general. So what do I mean by operational oceanography? Well, Eurogoose defines it as the activity of systematic, long-term and routine measurements that are importantly rapidly interpreted and disseminated so that they actually are useful to the people who need them today. This information can be in hindcast mode, providing information about the past ocean, nowcast mode, describing the present ocean, and of course forecasts that provide information on a future state of the ocean. So the usefulness of hindcasts is that they allow us to monitor the changing state of the ocean. And it helps us to understand those long-term changes and how they are related to atmospheric processes. Nowcasts and forecasts, on the other hand, provide immediately useful information for various stakeholders via dissemination portals like the National Oceans and Coastal Information Management System, or OCIMS, that was implemented by the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, or DFFE. So SAON's part in all of this is in developing various types of operational products that will feed directly into OCIMS. Apart from an optimized high-resolution hindcast or historical ocean model of our entire exclusive economic zone, downscaled from globally available products, we have also been developing nowcast and forecast tools by adding value to existing satellite and global model products. We are also developing custom coastal and bay scale forecast models that reach scales that the global products are just unable to. So given the need to develop our own models brings me to SOMSANA, which means the Sustainable Ocean Modeling Initiative, a South African approach. Its vision is for the sustainable development of an operational ocean current forecast system for South Africa. Aside from the actual development and dissemination of ocean models, the key word here is sustainable. In order to ensure the longevity and continued development of an operational ocean forecast system, it is crucial that we have enough capacity to do the work. And therefore, the two immediate goals of SOMSANA is to develop useful demonstration forecast products, as well as to develop local capacity. I have it on a colleague's good authority that SOMSANA means something like to work together in Sepedi. And this is exactly the approach that we are trying to foster, certainly in our modeling developments, but particularly in the supervision of a number of students as part of joint projects with various institutes, both local and international, on subjects ranging from coupled biogeochemical modeling to data assimilation. So an example of one of these students who is currently using the CHPC is Jonathan Rogerson, who is developing a high-resolution ocean model of the southern Benguela region, which will eventually be coupled to a biogeochemical model to understand the role of retention on hypoxia on the southern Benguela shelf, where lobster walkouts periodically occur, famously in Elands Bay, due to the low oxygen. So coming back to the operational modeling mission of SOMSANA, our big dream has been to develop a high-resolution operational forecast system for our entire EEZ. The idea would be to use a downscaling approach using freely available global forecasts forcing the boundary and freely available atmospheric forecasts at the surface. There is a long lead time on this. So there are a number of steps on the way that begins with a thorough evaluation of various global models that can be used as boundary conditions so that we can then choose the most appropriate one to force our model with. So once we've chosen our atmospheric and boundary forcing products, we prepare our model grid, which downscales the 1/12 of a degree, or that's roughly 7 to 9 kilometers global product, to a 1/36 of a degree, or a 3 kilometer regional EEZ product. We design our configuration with appropriate model parameterizations. We decide whether we want to include tides and various different forcing parameters is done on the CHPC. So we have a number of benchmarking and evaluations to do. So once we've done those evaluations, we decide whether our results are an improvement on the already existing global models. And if not, we go through the cycle again. We change our grid, our forcing, or our configuration parameters, we rerun and assess. Eventually, until we produce something that is an improvement on the global models, at this point, we will firstly celebrate, and then we implement the configuration in forecast mode. So at the moment, all of the development has been on the CHPC. Our scaling analysis has shown that 196 CPUs are optimal for this simulation. This allows us to run about 10 years in under a week, which allows us to a lot of leeway to do many iterations and really polish this model until it's perfect. Once a stable forecast system has been developed on the CHPC, the idea is that its operationalization, including its timeliest dissemination to stakeholders, would take place at an operational institute such as DFFE or SORS. Our evaluation of global products show that they actually perform really well on shelf scale. So what we're looking at here are, in the top right figure, are lines of constant sea surface height. They give us an idea of what the surface ocean currents are doing. So where these lines are close together, the current is fast, and where they're further apart, the current is weaker. So you can see that Glorice, HighCom, and Brand, the 3 global models that we're evaluating, all capture the Agulhas current relatively well. They all reproduce the retroflexion and the meandering return currents with a fairly good degree of accuracy. However, when we start to look closer inshore, and I'm not going to go into details here, but on the bottom right, we're looking at current roses of each of the models compared with in situ observations within Algoa Bay. We note that the models don't do very well. They start to fall apart. And it is in these regions that we really need reliable information for the state of the ocean for stakeholders. Because of this, we've decided to implement a limited area, small domain forecast model of key coastal regions around our coastline that we disseminate operationally so that we can give operational forecast systems some sort of exposure while we develop our bigger system. The obvious first choice was Algoa Bay. And of course, like I've already said, this is home to one of our largest MPAs and is also where ship-to-ship refueling happens. There has already been a big oil spill here. Lucky it wasn't too big, but at the time when we were asked, we actually didn't have an appropriate forecast model to assist with the cleanup. Another compelling reason to use Algoa Bay as a pilot site is that it's one of SAN's sentinel sites that is run by our L1 node based in Rebecca. And it is really well monitored. We have loads of instruments in the water for long-term measurements, which means we're able to perform rigorous evaluations of our model outputs, but also moving forward, there is the potential to assimilate operational in situ data into our forecast model. So the grid itself is curvilinear, and it increases in resolution towards the interior of Algoa Bay, where we reach a horizontal resolution of about 500 meters. As part of this development phase, we ran a short hindcast simulation of this configuration using each of the 3 global models. And after a thorough analysis using the in situ data at Algoa Bay, we decided that Glorice, which is a global model that is developed by Mercator Ocean in Europe, was the best model for us to use to force our regional model of Algoa Bay. So what you see here is a little, it should be animating shortly. There we go. This is our sea surface temperature forecast. This is from a few months ago, but you should be able to click on that link and find today's forecast for the next 5 to 10 days. It gives, you know, beautiful animations of current sea surface height, sea surface temperature, salinity of Algoa Bay. So this is a pilot study. We haven't polished it, and we haven't even got a quality assurance, quality control system in place, but it's very much a work in progress. So aside from just providing a sense of the forecast of marine weather, we also wanted to provide something more useful to stakeholders within Algoa Bay, especially in light of the, you know, the oil bunkering operation and the bird colony. So we coupled this to a very simplified particle tracking model. It doesn't contain any oil weathering in it, but the idea is that this particle tracking coupling will provide stakeholders within Algoa Bay a little bit of information in the case of an oil spill. You know, if they need to decide where they should go first in order to, you know, mitigate the impacts of an oil spill, this will hopefully help them more easily. Right. So our next pilot site is False Bay. It actually includes Table Bay as well as Walker Bay. And this region is also really important because not only is there aquaculture industry off Walker Bay, a few years ago they lost a lot of money due to harmful algal bloom events. It's also, of course, Table Bay is an extremely important shipping location, but also there's a lot of interest in False Bay as well, and it will be one of Sound's next sentinel sites. So this is under development. Our first iteration of the model looked really good. The lines, if we just focus on the bottom plot here, the blue line shows in situ temperature observations off sea points. It's a climatology, so it's a monthly mean seasonal cycle. The green lines are the highest resolution satellite product that we could lay our hands on, and the orange line is our model. So this gave us a lot of confidence that our model was actually doing better than the best satellite product out there, which is great, especially given that we often use satellite products to evaluate our models. So we were very happy at first sight. But as we zoomed out and looked at the large scale circulation, what we're looking at here at the bottom is our high resolution model. And at the top is the global product. We note that in our model, these are lines of sea surface height, we've got a very strange boundary current problem happening here. So we are still in this developmental cycle, and without the CHPC, this whole process would take so much longer and would be so much more difficult for us. In this slide are a number of things that we want to do to improve our models. I'm not going to go through them because I'm not really, I don't think it's relevant here, but just to say that we are very much at the beginning of our journey, and there's a lot more to do going forward. So the development of a South African operational ocean forecast system supports not only the governance side of the oceans economy theme of Operations Hpc, but it will also contribute internationally to both Coast Predict and Foresee that are endorsed programs of the UN Ocean Decade. Both have the overarching goal of developing ocean prediction capabilities that will benefit society. So my big goal is to represent South Africa in these programs and help to get operational ocean forecast systems more available to developing countries in Southern Africa. And finally, I'd like to thank you all for your attention, and also a huge shout out to the CHPC and the support we get from them. Without your resources, these computationally expensive developments would be a real challenge for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was actually really fascinating, and thanks for presenting that in such a way that it was easy to understand and follow. How are we doing for questions? I'm not seeing any questions being forwarded at the moment. Okay, so no questions as yet. So I'll ask. I'll come up with a question.
Thanks, Charles.
What's your biggest constraint with this modeling? So you mentioned, for example, using 192 processor cores. Would you benefit from more, or the model's not big enough to make use of more? Do you have a problem with? Do you reach a point where the parameterization of the models is such that there's no point to going to a higher resolution, or is your biggest constraint just actually having the experienced people to do all this?
Charles, that's a very excellent question. In terms of the number of cores, we find, as we use more cores, the less efficient it becomes, which I guess is normal. But it's, in this ROMS model, if we divide it up too much, it's the communication between the tiles that becomes the constraint. So for us, 196 was optimal. After that, it was starting to go down. But I would say it's actually the human capacity, so that's the big difficulty. Hence my big push toward developing local capacity so that we can sustain this thing going forward. Recently, I've got collaborators in the United States, and they were amazed at the efficiency of running these models at the CHPC. They said, wow, you're running them really quickly on the CHPC relative to what they had access to. And I was really quite surprised. But yeah, thank you.
So the question that follows on from that really is your students. So it's one thing getting lots of students involved in the development of all this. Where are they going after finishing their studies? Is there scope for them to carry on this sort of professionally?
Well, we developed these forecasts in collaboration with OSIMS, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with. It's a project developed by the Department of Fisheries, Forestry and the Environment to provide forecast information. And the idea was that, or the hope was that we would develop a sort of modeling group at DEF, and they could be employed in that way. But the times have been odd in the last couple of years, and unfortunately funding for that hasn't come through yet. So we are trying to support students in contracts where possible, but that is another big worry because, we can train until we're blue in the face and produce PhD students, but a lot of them are leaving. Bjorn Backerberg, one of my friends from UCT, has left, for example. So yeah, it's a problem.
That's a key thing. We do actually have two audience questions here. We've got the inevitable Quinn Reynolds question. Thank you for a very interesting presentation, Jennifer. Once you have built up a large set of global regional simulation results, do you think it will be of any value to use data-driven AL, ML, machine learning, automatic learning, machine learning methods to generate rapid forecasts?
I think it definitely would be. It's an avenue that I haven't looked into, but I think it's probably, I expect it was probably the way of the future, using machine learning more. I'm afraid I can't answer that in more detail, but I would say yes.
But like they used to say, computational fluid dynamics, it's the future and it will always be. Always has been, always will be. There's a question from Krishna. Typically, how many iterations does it take before you reach some sort of conversion to what you, or convergence probably to what you expect, or does it vary from model to model? In other words, I think this is related to your model development.
Yes, that's another. I mean, it totally depends on the resolution of your model and what are you benchmarking it against. The problem is we also don't have a lot of in situ information. We rely a lot on satellites, which isn't perfect. You know, satellite products near the coast, especially, they don't resolve important features properly. So it depends what you compare against. And for example, I'm still developing this big hindcast simulation. And so far, I think I've got up to iteration number 7. So it's challenging, and it's especially challenging in this area because you've got the western boundary current and the eastern boundary current that are interacting, and you know what the one system needs maybe isn't the same as the other one. So there's nuances to the system that make it especially challenging. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for those answers, and thank you for a most interesting talk. I think we've run out of questions now. And we've just got 3 minutes or so before we'll go to our next talk. Welcome back to the session, everyone. It's my pleasure to introduce to you Mr. Godwin Mafireyi. He's one of our commercial users at the Center for High Performance Computing. And unlike a lot of our commercial users who tend to be in the engineering and fluid dynamics side, he is actually in the plant development side. He works for Starke Ayres. He has previously worked for the Agricultural Research Council and the Northwest Department of Education. His talk is entitled Bioinformatics for Vegetable Breeding at Starke Ayres. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone. Just quickly share my screen. Right. Okay, thank you everyone for tuning into this talk. As Dr. Charles introduced me, my name is Godwin Mafireyi. I am doing the bioinformatics at Starke Ayres. I'm just going to talk about some of the bioinformatics work that we're doing to support vegetable breeding here at Starke Ayres. So to begin, I'll just introduce to those of you who do not know what Starke Ayres is, like what we're all about. So Starke Ayres is one of the largest seed companies in Africa, and we specialize in the development of superior seed varieties. So we therefore have like a lot of breeding programs in different crops. So tomato, cabbage, sweet corn, pepper, beans, squash, and onions. So all of these are different breeding programs that are currently running in different stations across the country. So to support the work that these breeders do to produce these high quality seeds, we have a genetics and pathology research facility in Kempton Park, Johannesburg. So we do this to help the breeders understand the genetics of their plants, as well as how the plants interact with the pathogens that might attack them. So that's, yeah. So bioinformatics forms therefore a crucial part of the genetics department. So we assist the other researchers and the breeders to gain a deeper understanding of the genetics of their germplasm. So we do this by employing different bioinformatics tools and softwares to perform computationally demanding processes. So these include aligning sequence reads to reference genomes, and then calling variants, genome assembly, and drawing phylogenetic trees. So all of this is in an effort to develop molecular markers. So these markers are used for different work, like marker-assisted selection, where a breeder, instead of inoculating their plants with the actual bacteria, they can just run a marker and then to tell them that this plant is or isn't resistant to such a disease. So that's the bioinformatics work that we do. So as we might all know, bioinformatics or genomics in general deals with a large amount of data. So there are different companies such as Illumina, Incaba, biosequencing that develop and produce large amounts of sequence data. So to work or to process this data, that requires a lot of computational resources. We're doing plant genomes that range from 400 megabases to 16 gigabytes. That's the onion genome. So yeah, so performing such bioinformatics operations in this type of plants might actually call for vast amounts of memory, storage, and processing power. So therefore, that's so to just give an example of the computational needs that the bioinformatics department wants. So this is one of our runs where we are trying to align sequence reads of one of our plants. So we do a lot of comparative genomics. So when you need to compare plants with different traits, for instance, comparing plants that have got resistant to a certain disease to those ones that do not. So to do that, we have to align those reads to reference and then compare and call variants between them and see which SNPs or indels, SNPs are those variants, which SNPs or indels are actually causing an effect on the resistance or susceptibility of the plant. Okay, so this slide here shows an alignment of resequencing data to a genome that's 3 gigs in size with 150 base per reads of Illumina data. So as you can see how my task manager looks like here, it shows. So this is a computer that's, well, it's a good computer. It's one of the most powerful desktop computer that we have at our company. It's a 32 gig RAM, Core i7, so 3.4 gigahertz of processing power. But with just one alignment, aligning one set of data to that reference genome, we're using 100% of our CPU, and the memory is almost 50%. So having to do this for at least 40 plants, that would take us at least 80 days just to align the reads. And then there were downstream processes of calling variants against the reference and also doing the actual analysis and comparative genomics. So this is one of the computational needs that we need. Also, besides just calling variants and designing molecular markers, there are certain times where you actually need to assemble a genome de novo. So in cases where there's no reference genome available. So this is one assembler that we use to assemble plant genomes. So you can see the hardware requirements for such an assembler is 2 terabytes of RAM, 64 cores, to 10 terabytes of disk space, depending on the size of the genome. So this type of assembly is not even possible to do on normal desktop computers or laptops, which is why we thought at the beginning of this year, since we'll be working on onion genomics, the 60 gigabytes in size, to use CHPC resources. All right, so the reason why we came to the decision of requesting CHPC to give us the resource is that we could utilize its powerful processes and massive storage to process our data faster and more effectively. As I mentioned, these projects have been extremely slow, or maybe not even possible if we're using a computer, just normal desktop computer. And then the other benefit that we saw from the CHPC is that there are a lot of bioinformatics tools that are pre-installed on the in-house cluster. So that would save us a lot of time from configuring and installing the software packages. And then also the parallelization capabilities of CHPC allow us to process data faster and more efficiently as the data is required, usually at a fast pace, depending on what the builders want. So my talk is not going to be too long. To conclude, we have started using the CHPC at the beginning of this year, and then this has actually accelerated our marker development pipelines, and we moved most of our workloads there. We have developed and identified different QTLs, regions where we expect disease-resistant genes to be clustered at. And then we've developed some markers that we're actually using in the lab at the moment for marker-assisted selection. And future work that we're going to be trying to do next year is proper de novo assemblies. That is where we need a vast amount of hardware and processing power when we're assembling the genome of onion, and then using that reference genome to do downstream analysis such as marker development and seeing QTL mapping. Yeah, I think my talk is going to be that brief. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Godwin. That was very interesting. Been watching, obviously, your progress as a commercial user, because it's always interesting for us to keep an eye on where our commercial users are getting to and what kind of value they're extracting from the process. So thank you for that talk. Are there any further questions from the audience in the meantime? While the audience thinks about it, Quinn, I'm looking at you in particular. I'm going to ask what's almost a standard question for me, which is, what do you regard as your biggest constraints? In other words, what would enable you to do even more? Do you need more people? Do you need more storage space? Do you need faster processors, more cores? What would make things more productive for you?
Well, at the beginning of when we started, the different crops with different genome sizes. So the crops that we're using previously were quite smaller genome sizes. So we could do all our analysis locally on our servers, yeah. But now with the new breeding program that have been introduced, like the onion breeding program, our main constraint was computational power, as well as human resources. So we've been hiring new bioinformaticians to help us process that large amount of data that is coming. So if I can answer your question in a nutshell, yeah, the biggest constraints is mainly computational power, but then so far from what we've been doing on this HPC now, the processing power, storage, and memory has been sufficient so far. We have to see when our data from the onion sequencing comes in, how much, if that is going to be, if this HPC is going to be able to handle that.
Thank you for that. I see we do have a question from Quinn. Thanks, Godwin. This is brilliant. I had no idea that Starke Ayres were doing this kind of advanced research. I'm amazed at the difference in genome length between different plant species, and I can see that it has a huge impact on computational load. More a general biology question, but why are there such extreme variations in length?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Well, I mean, like variation between plant genomes is something, I think it's just nature design, where you find some other plants are more complex than other ones. It's quite interesting why the onion genome in particular is so big. It's like 16 gigabytes, and the tomato one is like 700 megabytes in size. Yeah, so I think that's just nature's design, and also like there is a lot of study going on to actually find out, like, besides disease resistance and just the phenotype of the plant, what else the rest of the genome is used for. So yeah, it's probably nature design.
Very interesting, very interesting. Well, thank you, Godwin. I think we've run out of questions. Just a remark for everybody. All talks will also be available as videos on YouTube after the conference. If there are no further questions, I think we can close this session, and thank you for everybody who attended, and thank you in particular to our presenters.